In this video, you will see the Zoom ID posted at the beginning and end of our fellowship hour following the service. This begins at 12:30 and goes till 1:30, giving us a short break after worship. Feel free to eat lunch and have a drink with us. During this time, we are not taking tithes. If you have a need and feel comfortable posting your Venmo in the comment section, please do so. You can also message us privately. For those that have abundance, please share with those in need as you are able. For our musicians and artists, you may see a Venmo ID or organization of their choice displayed. Please tip them as you are willing and able. At the end of our service, we will take communion together. Set aside something to munch on and a drink for this portion. If you like our service, please share the video. Sometimes during our services, we cover heavy topics. Some things may be triggering at points. If the subject matter gets too heavy, we understand and want you to take care of yourself. Step away for a moment, come back later, or skip if you need. We are a diverse community, and the only thing we don't tolerate is intolerance. We are not a church where you will always be comforted. What you will find is you will always be challenged. We ask that everyone comes to this space open and willing to listen. We hope that this space fosters community, conversation, reflection, and action.
I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he stood so fiercely against such iniquity. I'm singing, oh, how marvelous and how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. Oh, how marvelous and how wonderful is the love that sets the captives free. For me, it was in the garden. He said, not my will, but thine. He carried his cross up Calvary, and I'm willing to carry mine. I'm singing, oh, how marvelous and how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. Oh, how marvelous and how wonderful is the love that sets the captives free. I'm singing, oh, how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is love that sets the captives free. No justice, no peace.
In honor of the Black Lives Matter protests and the righteous anger and legitimate sadness that we've all been feeling, I wanted to share a poem by a favorite African-American poet of mine, Curtis Lampkin, who performs with a traditional African instrument called the kora. And I wanted to share a poem, this one in particular, that is very joyful, to remind us of joy. And I wanted you to be able to hear Curtis play and perform and recite his poem as only he can do.
Pretty summer day. Grandmama sitting on a porch, easy, rocking her grandbaby in her wide lap. Old men sitting in their Lincoln, tasting and talking and talking and tasting. Young boys on the corner milking a yak-yak. Wild hands, baggy pants. Young girls halfway up the block playing, jumping that double dutch, singing this song. They say, Kenny kind of Paula, be on time, cause school begins at 8:45. They jump 1, 2, 3, and Round the corner comes this young woman, dragging herself heavy home from work. She sees the young boys, she sees the old men, but when she sees those girls, she just starts smiling. She said, let me get a little bit of that. They say, you can't jump, you too old. Why they say that? Why they say that? She said, Tanya, you hold my work bag. Shanika, come over here, girl, I want you to hold my handbag. Josie, hold my grocery bags, please. Kebe, take my purse. Then she started bobbing her head, jacking her arms, trying to catch the rhythm of the ropes. And then she jumps inside those turning loops. The girls crowd her, sing their song. They say, Kenny kind of Paula, be on time, cause school begins at 8:45. And jump 1, 2, 3, and She jumping around on one leg, they say, She dancing sassy, saucy, Jump for the girls, mama, jump for the stars, mama, jump for the young boys saying, jump, mama, jump, mama. Jump for the old men saying, jump, mama. Jump for the old woman saying, go ahead, baby. And what the young girls say? What the young girls say? Jump, mama, jump, mama, jump, mama, jump, mama. Okay.
I'm waiting for you as the sun keeps shining, and I keep on pushing myself out the sea. I'm waiting for the days we just step out the cages, cause we're stranded, still seem to sleep. And I keep waiting for you, and I keep waiting for you, for someone to set us free. And we keep waiting for you, and we keep waiting for you, for someone to set us free. I keep on waiting for you, I keep on waiting for you, I keep on waiting for me. I keep on waiting for you, I keep on waiting for someone to come set us free. I'm waiting for myself to stop the fight and open up and just love me for me. I'm waiting for the failures, cause they keep me moving forward when it's hard to breathe. And I keep waiting for you, and I keep waiting for you, for someone to set us free. And we keep waiting for you, and we keep waiting for you, for someone to set us free. I keep on waiting for you, I keep on waiting for you, I keep on waiting for me. I keep on waiting for you, I keep on waiting for someone to come set us free. Well, I found myself backed up on stage. No, I could never sit still and never behave. They said that I'm too loud, a little too brown. Don't like that I'm so loud. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. Who I'm supposed to be. Who I'm supposed to be. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. Who I'm supposed to be. Who I'm supposed to be. Babe, I keep on waiting for you. I just keep on waiting for you. I 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 keep on waiting for me. Yeah. But I I keep on waiting for ya. I keep on waiting for ya. I keep on waiting for me. I keep on waiting for ya. I keep on waiting for someone to come set us free. Someone to come set us free. I just keep on waiting for me. I keep on waiting for ya. I keep on waiting for ya. I keep on waiting for me. I keep on waiting for ya. I keep on waiting for someone to come set us free.
Happy Sunday, y'all. Welcome to Greater Purpose, where we proclaim that Black, Native, and the lives of all of those on the margins matter, where the LGBT community is celebrated and affirmed in their identity, where God is non-binary, and where all faiths, the spiritually uncertain, and even atheists are invited to participate in our community here online while we're in this age of COVID. Now, before we get started, I have to address this. This is very important. PSA moment here. I've been seeing a lot of debate online about schools reopening with parents, and I have to say that most of the people, not all, but most of the people that are adamantly for reopening schools right now are once again Trump supporters and Christian. Give me a minute to put on my surprise beard. Not shocked. Not shocked at all. At Greater Purpose, we are blessed with many educators and professors in our church and in our online community, and I would be doing them a disservice if I did not talk about this. Listen, PSA, if you want schools to reopen because you think your child will ultimately be fine if they contract coronavirus, then know that by you advocating for sending kids back to school during an unbridled pandemic, that you are really saying that you don't give a shit about the welfare of our teachers, librarians, school administrators, cafeteria employees, maintenance workers, and or school nurses. Like, you people don't care about the systemic injustice and brutality that created Black Lives Matter. You don't care about refugee children in cages. You don't care about the lives of innocent Muslims bombed in an unjust war. You don't care about the countless species of animals being extinguished by pollution. You don't care about native sites of sacred significance being desecrated for profit and their rivers being poisoned. You don't care about women losing access to life-saving health care and losing the freedom to govern their own bodies. You don't care about trans people being misgendered constantly or worse, being murdered. You don't care about the LGBT community being oppressed, and now you don't give a shit about the vulnerable or the welfare of essential workers during a pandemic? I mean, let's just be honest, man. This All Lives Matter bullshit is some serious false advertising. Some serious false advertising. And moreover, the precious lives of our educators and other employees of school systems that adore your children and chose, let me repeat that, chose to enter a career that is highly stressful and highly underpaid to cultivate your child's future. These heroes do not deserve to be the sacrificial lambs placed on the altar of an incompetent administration and a tyrannical toddler. They deserve better, and you need to be better. So, with that being said, I actually wasn't going to drink today, but I swear, man, y'all got me drinking. I'm just kidding. Pour you one too. This is a PG-13 church, if you couldn't tell already. So, back to the lesson at hand today. Previously, we discussed how the kingdom of Israel was split into two kingdoms. And if you're new here, we have all of these services logged. You can check them out on our YouTube channel, Greater Purpose Community Church. You can look that up and catch up as the week goes on if you're looking for something to binge, because we're all running out of stuff to binge. But previously, we discussed how the kingdom of Israel was split into two kingdoms. Now, occasionally, these kingdoms, they worked in concert with one another, but sometimes, as we mentioned before, they were at war with each other. And around 722 BCE, the northern kingdom, composed of 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, so most of the tribes of Israel, that kingdom fell to the Assyrian Empire. Now, interestingly enough, there is an archaeological inscription that confirms this defeat. So we are finally starting to see evidence of some of the events that are described in the text, which is kind of exciting. Now, there are two kings, Omri and Ahab, that would be mentioned in the following scriptures, and they are the first two characters that are mentioned in artifacts outside of the Hebrew Bible. So, thus far, the only character that we can confirm existed was possibly David, because the house of David was mentioned, but we're not actually certain if David existed or not. He may have been a mythical character. However, these two characters are mentioned. So we've been studying this for a while now. Finally, we have two characters that did exist. So we know that these two kings actually did rule, and we're going to talk about them in a little more detail in a future lesson. But today, you need to know that these two were responsible for establishing a region that was known as Samaria. You probably heard of it. And it would become a province after the northern kingdom was defeated by the Assyrians in 722. Now, the southern kingdom of Judah, however, which was composed of the remaining two tribes of Israel, would somewhat maintain their independence during this time, but they are reduced to the status of being vassals and their tributary to the Assyrians. Now, after Samaria became an Assyrian province, the Assyrian king Sargon removed most of the inhabitants of the northern kingdom and scattered them across his empire and transplanted a new populace in Samaria, and that would ultimately submit to the authority of Assyria when these people were beckoned. Population transplanting was pretty common for Assyrians because it reduced their risk of rebellions in conquered lands. Now, for a modern example, we can look at the Trail of Tears in America. It was conducted partially for similar reasons. By moving these residents of the land you stole, empires diminish the chance of land being retaken. It's evil, it's brilliant, but it's evil nonetheless. Now, the new residents of Samaria, they would actually practice a form of religion that was very similar to Israelite worship, but it did have some variations, and we're going to get to those variations in a moment. But Samaria's different theology was not favored at all by the southern kingdom of Judah. But that likely was really a very small reason for the Israelites' disdain of the Samaritans, because after the fall of the northern kingdom, the Samaritans were now basically colonizers. They were implants from foreign lands, submissive to the whims of a ruthless empire. Now, studying this story for me was amazing because it really altered my perspective of one of my favorite parables in the Gospels. I actually wrote about this parable in my book that I wrote last year, Reborn Again, and though I stand by the overall substance within my book, this new knowledge gives the parable a totally new and exciting meaning for me. I'm going to read the Gospel parable where Jesus talks about a Samaritan. It says this: "Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he said, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?' He said to him, 'What is written in the law? What do you read there?' The lawyer answered, 'You shall love the Lord God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself.' And Jesus said to him, 'You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live.' But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?' And Jesus replied with this parable. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So, likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him. And when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on his wounds. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Jesus asked. And the lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Now, the following information in my book was the initial analogy that I drew from this gospel narrative. I'll read that to you so you have some context. I said, in the Talmud, the Samaritans are called Kuthians. The term is derived from the city Kutha, which is geographically located in modern-day Iraq. Samaritanism is similar to Judaism, and it shares much of the same sacred text. The most notable differences between them are that Samaritans believe that Mount Gerizim is God's chosen city, not Jerusalem. Samaritans also maintain a different variation of the 10 Commandments. If you were to compare the 2 faiths side by side, overall, they would be extremely similar to one another. Kind of like the 3 major Abrahamic faiths today, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They are incredibly similar to one another if you examine them side by side. This tension between faiths is why the parable of the Samaritan is so interesting. There was a lot of hatred exchanged between the differing faith communities during the time of Christ, and some beliefs were more contemptuous to the Jewish people at that time than others. Samaritanism was a top contender for the most loathed heretics of this age. In that same vein, today, Islam is tragically the most reviled of the 3 Abrahamic religions in the world of evangelicalism. It is the reason why so many Christians are anti-Palestine, even with irrefutable evidence that the Palestinian people are being oppressed by Israeli legislation and occupation. Many Christians still support Israel regardless. In fact, the largest American lobby for pro-Israeli policy, AIPAC, is largely funded by Christian Zionists, not Jewish peoples. Now, let me be clear, we love Jewish people here at Greater Purpose Community Church. I mean, I worship one every Sunday with you all. But criticizing unjust policy is not anti-Semitism. I want to make that abundantly clear. And to get back to my original point, this section in my book is still relevant, and my conclusion of this parable narratively is still a solid comparison, I think. I mean, Islamophobia is a disease, and ground zero for this morally depraved epidemic is the church. And I stand by every point that I made in that book. # Free Palestine. Click like if you agree. It's Friday now, and I see those likes going all over the place. But now that I know the backstory that created the tension between Israelites and the Samaritans, the story takes on a whole new and incredibly relevant meaning. The Samaritans were transplants from the Assyrian Empire. They were colonized, and their presence in the former northern kingdom of Israel likely destabilized the southern kingdom as well, and it destabilized their ability to hold their land. And then later in the timeline of the ancient Israelites, about 150 years later, that southern kingdom would fall. And because of this, there was likely a great deal of resentment from the Israelites toward the Samaritan colonizers. Now, fast forward a few centuries later to the parable I just read. This region is under the boot of another empire. No longer an Assyrian boot on the necks of the Israelites, but this time it would be a Roman boot on their necks. The Israelites' history from the point of it being conquered by the Assyrians on is peppered with the rise and fall of empires that would continually oppress their people. So pop quiz, in this knowledge, what group of people in the mind of the ancient Israelite do you think they thought was partially responsible for this constant oppression? The colonizers of the northern kingdom, the Samaritans. So in this parable, the last person that an Israelite audience would expect to be the protagonist in the narrative would be the descendants of colonizers. But in the narrative, Jesus takes this character and makes him an example to be revered. And perhaps it was just kindness that the Samaritan was showing the battered Israelite that was on the brink of death. Perhaps the overall message of the story is to be kind to people in need. But perhaps there is something more going on with the story. Perhaps the Samaritan was engaging in an act of reparation. Now, was the Samaritan directly responsible for the occupation by the Assyrians centuries earlier? Of course not. That happened way before this guy was born. But the point is, by this moment in time, in varying degrees, everyone, including this Samaritan, was under the boot of Rome. And in this parable, it is possible that the Samaritan, who's also oppressed to a degree, engages in an act of kindness, but also an act of reparation and an act of atonement. So to the white folks listening to the sermon, hear me out. I know that you may be in poverty yourself. I grew up poor as well. I know that you are likely far removed from benefiting from the label of the 1%. I'm sure you're not part of the 1% if you're watching this church video. But that does not change the fact that our ancestors condoned and or committed crimes against Native, Black, Brown, and Asian Americans. I am ashamed to admit that I have ancestors that they proudly fought for the Confederacy. I have a great, I don't know how many greats, grandfather who was an officer in the Confederate military. Now, am I responsible for his past atrocities? Hell no. But am I responsible in dismantling the aftermath of his crimes? Yes. Yes, I am. It does not matter what my position in this world is. The fact of the matter remains that centuries of injustice were sown with the aid of my ancestors. And by the way, side note, as a descendant of a Confederate officer that died in the Civil War, that flag needs to be incinerated and the ashes scattered in the winds of insignificance, because neither my ancestor nor what he fought for deserves to be remembered. Now, click like if you agree, by the way. This week I was shocked and I was elated in that same vein to see the ruling of the Supreme Court in Oklahoma. I mean, give me some heart emojis if you were excited about this win this week. It was huge. And as significant as this ruling was, it's just a small step toward justice for Native peoples. And honestly, we got to get right back to work, because now it looks like the pipelines in North Dakota are possibly moving forward, even though there was possibly some steps that were being taken that were going to obstruct the pipelines from coming into sacred lands. It looks like it's moving forward and still endangering the sacred lands of Native Americans. But that's not all of the injustices we have in America that need to be addressed. These injustices that have been sown by decades, centuries of white supremacy. I mean, for example, Breonna Taylor has yet to receive justice. I mean, Flint, for crying out loud, still does not have clean water. And reparations for people of color that suffered for generations at the hands of slavery and other forms of systemic racism, they've never even really been attempted. I mean, if all lives matter, America, then why are people of color in the LGBT community still living theirs on the margins? If we are the land of the free, why are refugees and innocent black people in cages? If this land is our land, then why do we keep stealing its forest from the indigenous and poisoning its waters for profit? It is time to decolonize America. It is past time to decolonize the Christian faith. Jesus would demand as much from us, and according to this parable, especially from the ancestors of those responsible for its colonization in the first place. Click like if you agree. All right. That ends our section that I lovingly call Pulpit and Politics, and now we're moving on to Questions with the Rev. Each week, I will answer questions sent to me regarding theology. If you have a question about the Bible, theology, or the historical significance of a specific passage, please leave it in the comments, and I may choose to answer your question in a coming sermon. It may take me a while to find the answer because I may have to get consultation myself, because believe it or not, I don't know everything. All right, so this week, Shirley asked, is the word welcome in the Bible? Yes, it is definitely mentioned in the Bible, and the concept is mentioned at least 38 times in regards to societal instruction. And it's mostly to do with welcoming immigrants, welcoming strangers, welcoming refugees, so on and so forth. But some of the verses where the term or the idea of welcome is present, they're quite entertaining verses. One translation of the book of Proverbs says this: "Let your foot rarely be welcome in your neighbor's house, or they will become weary of you and hate you." So that verse was likely written by an introvert. I don't know who wrote it specifically, but guarantee they were an introvert. Either that or reincarnation is actually a thing, because those people that know me know that I don't have what they call the social skills, and that might be a previous life of mine. But moving on to the next question. This one wasn't really a theology question, but I think it was an important question. Amanda sent me quite a long statement, and I hope I do her question justice by summarizing it, because you could really feel the pain in everything that she sent me. In short, the question was this: what do I do about racist family members that I care about deeply? This is not a theology question again, but this especially hits home because her husband is black and her children are people of color. And this is my answer to you, Amanda. First, let me say that my heart really goes out to you, and I'm hoping some heart emojis are coming up, and our hearts as a collective community are going out to you. And to anyone else that's struggling with this, it's not fun at all. Secondly, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all approach to this kind of situation, because every family dynamic is different. Your family dynamic might be totally different from mine. Your family may be able to engage in reason and perhaps grow from conversations about these issues, and that's my hope for you, and I'm sure that's others' hope for you as well. But I also know that this is not always the case. People aren't always receptive to change and to engaging in conversations that expands their knowledge, because that's what happens when America doesn't invest in education for decades. I actually talked about what I call call-out culture in detail last week on my Facebook page, and there were some people that objected to my claim, but the following has been my overall experience in this world, because I've tried many approaches in dealing with this. So, and I'm also speaking as a former privileged and intolerant, bigoted conservative. I'm still privileged, but I'm no longer conservative or a bigot myself. And I'm no longer that way because I was called out. And know this: these conservatives, these hyper evangelicals, and even some neoliberal white folks, they don't like to be called out. But the sad truth is that conversation rarely works at times. But the batting average for either approach is very low, so know that going into this. I think, though, that if you've tried to be patient and you've attempted to reason with them, then it may be time to be direct. Just speak plainly. And if that doesn't work, then it might be time to get a little brash. And then finally, if that doesn't work, after many attempts at speaking truth to nonsense, then I think it's important that you protect you and your family from possible toxicity. And it may be, and I say may because it's totally up to you. It is your call. It may be time to cut them off. And if you have to do that, that is painful. That is painful to do with people in your circle of influence, much less your family, people you care about. Trust me, I've been there many, many times. But what these folks have to realize when you do, if you do, is that you're not cutting them off for a difference of opinion. You're cutting them off for a difference in morality. And it's been my experience that those final two steps of being direct, being brash and being removed from these people, it's been my experience that they yield more positive results. But the truth is, their augmentation, their change in character may not be immediate, or it may not ever happen. That's the truth. But by comparison, rarely, like I can count on one hand how often I have seen being reasonable and patient with people work. I've rarely seen that, but dozens of times I have seen people that I called out or cut off eventually, and that's the key word in that statement, eventually come back around and at least engage in a civil conversation from there. But I have to say that I can't fathom how many times I've had to try varying approaches. It's beyond counting. So again, the success rate is low no matter what path you choose. But if it gets to that point and you do have to cut them off, if and when they do come back to apologize, this is important, and they alter their character flaws, they grow personally, I think it's our responsibility to meet them with all the grace and love in the world. Because I think that's what it means to show mercy, especially if there is repentance. And repentance means not an apology, but an actual receipt of a change in behavior. So I think we absolutely must be gracious when people do change, if they change. Because the reality is, you cannot make them change. They have to want it, and though we wish everyone we love could be reasoned with, sometimes consequence is unavoidable. Sometimes it's the only thing that gets people to consider that they have an issue. And the only thing you can control in this life is yourself and the boundaries that keep you and your family safe. Because if you do that, no matter the outcome, you're going to be happier, even though it may sting at first. When you hold true to your boundaries and when you protect yourself from toxicity, even from people that you love, you are going to be all the more healthy for it. I promise. Now, again, I don't know what your family dynamic is like. I'm hoping that things can be settled with a conversation. I really and truly am. And to all those watching, I don't know what your family dynamic is like. I hope that it's overwhelmingly positive and beneficial. But regardless, and by the way, 2020, I saw that this week, irregardless is not a word. I don't care what Webster is saying this year. Everything is canceled in 2020. Irregardless is not a word. So regardless of what your dynamic looks like, consider us a greater purpose, an extension of your family. We love you. We affirm your identity, and we will fight for your safety and your access to happiness as long as there is breath in our lungs. And church, click like one final time if you can feel the love in our community. This is pre-recorded. I can feel the love from Friday. So let us now take communion together. Get your grain product and a beverage of any kind that you have. And please know that all people, all gender, sexual, racial, and spiritual identities are welcome, celebrated, and affirmed at this table. Because here at Greater Purpose, all means all. On the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body broken for you. Take and eat. And as often as you do, do so in remembrance of me." And likewise, he took out the wine and he poured it for his disciples. And he he said, "This is my blood poured out for you. Take and drink, and as often as you do so in remembrance of me." As you take of this bread and you take from this cup, know that you are love and you are meant to sow love in this broken world. Grace and peace to you. And now, may the revolution of Jesus go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you in healing this wasteland and protect you through the storm. May it lead you through this world seeking the justice it demands for you and for others. And may it bring you home preparing to continue love's mission beyond your doors. Grace and justice to you.